Today, we are going to be talking about the unsolved disappearance of Deanne Hastings. Deanne Hastings was born February 27, 1980, in Pahrump, Nevada. She had an older brother named Carson, and by all accounts, the two had a great childhood and parents who loved them. Carson and Deanne were best friends growing up. They always spent their time together playing outside, playing in the sandbox, and riding their bikes around neighborhood. When Deanne was in 4th grade, her and her family moved from Pahrump, Nevada to Spokane, Washington. Deanna was described as empathetic and friendly and outgoing, brilliant and fearless. She did extremely well in school. She got good grades, had a bunch of friends, and adjusted to her move from Nevada to Washington extremely well. She was just that type of versatile and resilient type of person. When Deanne was 15 years old, her parents got a divorce that ended in her father moving out of the family home. Not long after that, her brother Carson had left home as well for boot camp all the way in Texas. So this was an extremely difficult time for Deanne because it seemed as if everything that she knew in her life was changing and leaving. Those around her said that the spunky, energetic young woman was a completely different person after all of these changes. However, despite this being extremely hard on Deanne's mother described their relationship as them being best friends. It was just the two of them living together in the home, so they grew this extremely tight bond. When Deanne was 17 years old, her life completely changed when she found out that she was pregnant. Of course, she was extremely nervous for this new life that she now was carrying inside of her, but she was extremely excited, and the baby's father, a boy from high school, the two of them were dedicated to providing and working hard for their baby. In July of 1998, Deanne gave birth to a healthy baby boy who she named Hayden. Again, the two were extremely devoted to making a good life for their son, so Deanne decided to move in with Hayden's father, and the two spent 9 years trying to make their relationship work for Hayden before the two ultimately split up. This was another devastating hit for Deanne because she had spent so long just trying her hardest to get this relationship to work, but it just didn't work out the way that she wanted. So Deanne decided to move back in with her mother, and this was around the same time that Deanne's mental health started to take a turn for the worst. At this time, those around her said that she started going through these episodes where she would get into these fits of rage and start yelling and cursing and had all of these aggressive behaviors. She would come out of these episodes and she would feel bad about what she had just done, and she would return to the old Deanne and apologize, but then, eventually she would just go back to this other angry person. The person that she was turning into was completely different than the Deanne her family had once known, and her mother said that at this point her best friend was completely unrecognizable. It got to the point where Deanne would get into these episodes and then would just completely go off the grid for a couple of days just so her family didn't have to see her in this state. She would leave for days at a time, but she usually brought her phone with her. During these episodes, which typically lasted for 2 to 3 days, she would answer some text messages and usually act extremely apologetically. She would come back from these episodes extremely exhausted and would just come home and sleep for hours and hours and hours. This was the cycle for Deanne for a while. She would go into these intense, angry and delusional episodes where she would go off the grid and she didn't want anyone seeing how this was going for her, but she would still respond to people. She would still make sure that they knew she was okay, even if she only texted once in a while or she only answered every so often. She would check in and then come home from these episodes just absolutely exhausted and ready to be herself again. Of course, at this point, her and those around her knew that something was very wrong, and she was ultimately diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, after living with this disorder and having no idea what was going on, Deanne started using other methods to self-medicate, which I think is completely understandable. I mean, imagine going into these uncontrollable fits of rage and knowing that she was going to hurt those around her, but she just had absolutely no idea how to control it. So she did what she could, but of course, it made everything worse. She did try to get treatment after initially being diagnosed, but absolutely nothing seemed to work. Because of all of these issues that she was facing, Hayden started living with his dad. However, this did not stop Deanne from being extremely involved and a devoted mother. She loved her son very much and very much wanted to stay a part of her son's life. After Hayden moved out of Deanne's home, she decided to move in with her brother in Texas. She and her family agreed that she just needed a fresh start, a little bit of a change in scenery, just something to refresh her mind. This change in scenery had some drastic effects on Deanne's mental health. She started having fewer episodes. She started coming out of her shell and was becoming this outgoing, kind, and energetic woman she once was. She was starting to feel motivated and started taking care of herself and went back to school to become a nursing assistant. While living in Texas and starting to get her life back together again, she met a man named Randy. Randy and Carson had known each other through boot camp, and when the two met, there was an automatic spark between him and Deanne. Randy and Deanne started dating, and Carson was extremely excited for them because he knew Randy and he liked how well he treated his sister. The relationship moved pretty quickly, and after 6 months of dating, the two moved in together, and 3 months after that, the two got married. Before long, they had 2 children together, a son and a daughter, and things seemed like they were going extremely well for the family. She was absolutely loving motherhood and was feeling like herself again. However, she was still struggling with her disorder, and over the years, her mental health once again started to spiral. The episodes started creeping back into her life, and after 9 years of marriage, Randy and Deanne ended up getting a divorce. These episodes put such a huge strain on every relationship that Deanne was in, so this was yet again another extremely devastating thing for Deanne to go through. Now, with Randy being in the military, he worried that if he did get deployed, that Deanne would be the sole caretaker of the children, and with her episodes getting worse and worse, they decided the best thing for Deanne and the children was for them to move back to Spokane, Washington, in with her mother. However, even after moving home, her episodes just got worse and worse, and it got to a point where Deanne was experiencing the worst episodes that she had ever faced in her entire life. She decided that she needed even more professional help, so she decided to check herself in to an inpatient treatment facility in Idaho. Her 2 young children stayed with her mother, Patricia. Deanne just wanted her life back. She wanted to get whatever help that she needed and work as hard as she can so she can return home and be the mother that her children deserved. Her family was extremely excited for her to receive the extensive help that she needed. She responded extremely well to treatment, and when she was done, she actually decided to live on her own for a while before moving back home with her mother and children. She needed to learn how to take care of herself before trying to take care of young children. She did live about an hour away from her children, but she stayed in constant contact with them. She was starting to do very well and was finally on a treatment plan that kept her symptoms under control. She was finally starting to act like her old self again. Her family took notice, and everyone around her was extremely relieved to see Deanne taking control of her life again. So as Deanne was starting to get back into her life, she met a man named Mike Tibbetts. She had an instant connection with Mike, and they started dating. Their relationship took off extremely quickly, and things progressed extremely quickly. She was so happy to be in this new relationship and would call her brother and tell him how excited she was, and she was ready to be married again and was just absolutely so in love. Their relationship was blossoming, and they decided to get engaged. Also around this time, Deanne decided that she wanted to take her life in a new direction and start pursuing a career that she absolutely loved. She decided to enroll in cosmetology school. She had always had a passion for making others feel beautiful, and this was the perfect way to show her creative side. At this point, things were going great for Deanne. She had great relationships with her children. She was about to start this amazing new career, and she had a fiance who she was absolutely head over heels for. Her and Mike were living together and were excited to take this next step in their lives. Mike was working as a project manager for an HVAC company and was able to provide for himself and Deanne as she attended school. Now, before starting school, Deanne actually ended up having to change the bipolar medication that she was on. Her insurance did not cover the medication that she was previously taking, despite her doctor being absolutely adamant that these medications were essential to her treatment plan. Her old insurance did cover these medications, but she had just recently changed insurances, and this new one did not cover these medications. So because of this, she wasn't able to be on any sort of medication anymore. Mike did offer to pay for her medication out of pocket, but that just ended up not happening, and she just didn't take her medication anymore. Now, these medications were so important to her well-being, and just stopping medications like this can be absolutely detrimental for your mental health. But she had no other choice, so she just did her best to try and stay positive and keep moving forward. Deanne was set to start cosmetology school on November 3rd, 2015. She woke up that morning fluffy-tailed and ready to go. She went to her first day of cosmetology school at the Glendow Academy and had an amazing first day, so she was ready to go home and relax for the evening. That night, she invited her son Hayden's girlfriend Melanie over for a girls' night. Melanie and Hayden had been having some trouble in their relationship, so Deanne just wanted to hang out with her, do her nails, and have some girl time, which I just think is absolutely adorable. Despite her being only 17, Deanne treated Melanie like her daughter-in-law and said that no matter what, Deanne would always see Melanie as her daughter-in-law. And so while they had their girls' night, Mike was working the night shift, which was common for him, so the girls had the house all to themselves. Melanie had later said that Deanne was completely normal that night. She was happy and positive and was just generally excited about life. So Melanie left the house around 9:30 p.m. that night, and Deanne asked Melanie to text her when she got home safely, which she did. Deanne texted Melanie back saying thanks, that she loved her and would see her soon. At around 10 p.m., she texted her son Hayden that she had a good day at school and she hoped that he was proud of her. She sounded completely normal in this message, and absolutely nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, when Mike arrived home from work only about an hour after that, he had gotten home to an empty house with a note left behind that Deanne had written. In this note, she said that she had a good day. She did Melanie's nails, and she was just heading to the store, which was only about 5 miles away from their home. He didn't think much of this at first, but when 11:30 rolled around and Deanne still wasn't home, Mike did begin to worry. He couldn't figure out why she was taking so long at the store that was so close to them. At this point, Mike just decided to go out and start looking for Deanne, assuming that she may have just had car trouble or something like that. However, he didn't see her car anywhere, and when he got to the store, it was actually closed. He continued looking, but he could not find her anywhere. At around 2:30 a.m., Mike realized that he could actually track Deanne's phone, so he did that and then started following the GPS to her phone's location. As he was following her GPS, he entered a bit of a more rough neighborhood in Spokane, and around 3 a.m. he finally found Deanne's car in a public parking lot across the street from a small concert venue and bar called the Knitting Factory. When he got to the car, he went over to inspect it and started looking around and inside the car. He didn't think that anything looked out of the ordinary and thought that she must be nearby. However, after searching for some time around the area, he still could not find Deanne anywhere. He tried calling her cell phone, but he realized that her cell phone was still inside of her purse, which was inside of the car. He didn't have any way to get into the car, so he just decided to wait by the car, hoping that she would return. He waited all night, but she never showed up. At around 8:30 a.m. the next morning, so November 4th, Mike decided to call the Glendow Academy to see if Deanne had showed up for class, but he found out that Deanne did not show up for her second day of class. Of course, Mike panicked, and him and Deanne's family immediately started passing out missing persons flyers, posting them all over town. Now, while doing this, Mike got a notification that Deanne's credit card was being used at a grocery store called the Trading Company in a small town about 15 miles south of Spokane. Now, I do want to point out that there has been some mixed reporting on exactly where this grocery store was, whether it was about 15 miles south or 5 miles south. I'm not 100% sure, but for the details of this story to make sense, I think it makes a little bit more sense if it was 15 miles away, and you'll see why in a couple of minutes. So anyways, after getting this notification that Deanne's credit card was being used at the Trading Company, a grocery store, Mike decided not to go to that location and instead waited by her car, assuming that she would be back with her groceries since her cell phone and purse were still in the car. However, Deanne never showed up to her car, and after a few hours of waiting, he decided to actually go to the store himself. When he got there, he looked around for Deanne, but could not find her. He showed Deanne's flyers to an employee who actually said that she looked familiar, but he wasn't sure. He noticed that the store had a bunch of surveillance cameras, so he asked the employee if he could look at them. The employee asked the manager, who agreed and said that they could come back next Saturday to view the tapes. The next day after that, Thursday, November 5th, Deanne was still nowhere to be found, and this is when Mike actually finally decided to call the Spokane Police Department to report Deanne missing. This was 36 hours after the time that she had last been seen alive. Mike was told that they would take down a report and assign a detective to this case. However, Mike said that after he disclosed Deanne's mental health issues, they seemed dismissive and less interested in her case. There wasn't a sense of urgency for her case since she was an adult who had the right to go missing if she wanted to, and there wasn't any sign of foul play, and they knew that Deanne had this history of going off the grid during her episodes, and they assumed that this was all that this was, and they just thought that she would turn up in a couple of hours or days. Because of the police's disinterest in Deanne's case, Mike decided to go to the media to try and get Deanne's face out there. He wanted to get her story out there, but the weird thing is that he actually never contacted Deanne's family to tell them about her disappearance. Mike said that he didn't want to alarm the family because of her history of going off the grid, and if this were one of those times, he didn't want to cause any unnecessary panic for the family. Because of Mike not telling the family, Carson found out that his sister was missing after seeing it on the news, which is a much worse way of finding out than having someone that you know tell you. As sort of a side note, I do think that it's weird that Mike chose to tell the media and cause an uproar in the media and put her story and face out there, but he didn't think to cause a panic in the family, which makes sense, but at the same time, he was concerned enough to tell the media to get her face out there, but wasn't concerned enough to actually tell her family. I just think that that's something that's a little bit strange. So anyways, at first, Carson didn't immediately freak out about his sister's disappearance because, this happened before. However, when he called his mother to let him know what was happening, she did immediately freak out. Patricia knew that despite Deanne's history of going off the grid, that this time was different. Now, if Deanne were going to leave for a couple of days, she always contacted her family before doing so. She would never just run off without saying anything first. She would also check in every so often just to let them know that she was okay. She hadn't done either of those things this time. This time, her disappearance was different. Now, 4 days after her initial disappearance, Mike went back to the Trading Company to review the footage from November 4th when her credit card was used. They started going through the footage from around 12 p.m. that day, and immediately they ended up seeing Deanne at the checkout counter at the grocery store. However, what he saw in this footage did not sit right with Mike. When he saw Deanne on the security videos, she seemed to be moving quickly and erratically. She was making strange gestures with her hands and was looking over her shoulder as if she thought someone was following her. What she purchased was also a bit strange. She bought 4 energy drinks, she bought cigarettes, birthday candles, string cheese, and a bottle of vodka. These things were strange because there really weren't any events or birthdays or celebrations coming up that she would be buying these items for. There were also witnesses who saw Deanne that morning who said Deanne was acting erratically. So the grocery store was a part of a strip mall, and in that strip mall was a hair salon. A woman working in the hair salon said that Deanne walked in around 11:30 or 12 that morning acting confused, and she said that Deanne was calling her mommy and telling her a story of someone drugging her and kidnapping her. Then there were 2 other witnesses that saw her a few minutes later. They saw her sitting around the strip mall and just kind of acting strangely. The 2 women asked her if she needed any help or maybe a ride home, but they said that she was acting argumentative. So the woman thought this was strange, so she actually did call the police over. The police officer arrived around 12:45 that afternoon for a wellness check. By the time the police officer showed up, an ambulance had also arrived, and the EMTs were attempting to help Deanne, but she was refusing help and acting confrontational towards them. When the police officer tried to speak with Deanne, she was also acting confrontational, refusing to give the police officer her name and saying that she had been drugged and assaulted. However, the police officer thought that she just seemed drunk and had no signs of physical abuse. So when Deanne just started to walk away from them, the officer just left and did nothing further. Now, of course, the family was extremely upset when they found out that this officer did absolutely nothing, but the officer later stated that the state doesn't have any public intoxication laws, and since Deanne seemed able to take care of herself, there wasn't any reason to detain her. However, many people are still questioning this because there's no way, from what we know from witness statements, that she seemed able to take care of herself. She was going around saying that she had been drugged and beaten and was clearly not in the right state of mind. So no one can understand why this officer thought that she was not a danger to herself or anyone else. Now, the family continued to search and hand out flyers for Deanne, but they just could not find anything. This was until November 7th, 5 days after Deanne was last seen, when Mike received a phone call from someone not only claiming to recognize Deanne, but claimed that they had been together the night before she went missing. This man was the same employee at the grocery store that Mike had previously spoken to and who said that he recognized Deanne from the flyer that Mike showed him. The employee said that he thought the woman on the flyer just sort of looked like Deanne, but wasn't actually sure at the time if it was really her. So Mike and his sister decided to meet up with this employee who told them that he had met Deanne when she was walking out of the knitting factory for a cigarette. He said that he went up to talk to Deanne and didn't think there was really anything wrong at first. He offered her a cigarette, she accepted, and they talked. He initially said that Deanne did come home with him to his apartment, but he had a girlfriend at the time, so nothing sexual had occurred between the 2 of them. He said the next morning he drove Deanne to the grocery store where he worked so he could run in to buy cigarettes while she waited in the car. He said when he got back to his car, she was nowhere to be found. She had left and stolen his cell phone. He looked around for her for a while, but he just couldn't find her, so he decided to drive home. He said that when he did get home, this is when he noticed that her car keys were in his vehicle. So he gave the keys to Mike and said that he didn't know anything about Deanne's whereabouts and didn't know anything about her disappearance. Mike said that this employee struck him as odd, but when police talked to this man a few days later, they said he said the same story, except this time the employee said that him and Deanne had actually drank and smoked marijuana together the night that they were together. So he did change up the story a little bit, which did not sit right with Mike. Now, at this point, Mike had Deanne's car keys, so he went over to her car and unlocked the car and looked through it. He found her purse, her wallet, and her cell phone, but noted that a few credit cards were missing from her wallet. He then took the car and drove it home, which investigators did find odd, because of course, now that Mike had driven the car, any evidence or DNA that was in the car was now essentially ruined. Now, after Mike had driven the car home, he was now sitting there thinking about how this story that the employee was telling just didn't seem right. He was getting increasingly frustrated and wondered if this man could have drugged and kidnapped Deanne. Mike started making some phone calls, and him and a few friends actually went to this guy's house and started banging on the door, calling the guy's names, and asked to go through his apartment to see if he could find any sign of Deanne. He said he asked, but he really didn't give this guy much of a choice. So he kind of barged in, he went through the apartment, he searched extremely thoroughly, but he found absolutely no sign of Deanne in this guy's apartment. After this, the employee actually left the state of Washington and went back to his home state of Florida to live with his family. Mike was extremely frustrated and confused at this point and spent many hours every night just driving around searching for Deanne. Now, this entire time, police had been investigating behind the scenes, but were not making much progress in her case. They initially decided to look at cell phone activity and pings, but nothing came of this because her cell phone was just sitting in her car the entire time. However, police did decide to look into her credit card activity, which made some very interesting findings. From Sunday, November 7th through Thursday, November 12th, police found out that Deanne's credit card had been used around Spokane multiple times, mostly at grocery stores and pharmacies. Using this, they were able to gather some security videos and figured out who was using this card. However, they were shocked when they saw that the person using Deanne's credit card was not Deanne, but a light-skinned male who was wearing a black hoodie and a black hat. After watching security video, they found that this man had used the credit card, and then they also saw him walking out of the store with two other people. They released images of this man out to the public and immediately received numerous tips identifying this man as Randy Riley. After this initial identification, another tip came through from a woman who claimed to have seen Randy Riley and another man with Deanne on November 4th near a storage facility, College Storage Solutions, which was across the street from the trading company grocery store. Another woman confirmed this sighting and said that she had actually talked to Deanne and asked her if she was okay after she saw Deanne sitting on the ground when she was with these men. The witness said that Deanne said she was just going through a divorce and was just upset because of that. The witness said that she didn't call police because Deanne seemed to be in the right state of mind and she didn't seem like she was in any sort of danger. Randy Riley had a minor criminal history and had been arrested before. He seemed to mostly live on the streets but did have a listed address. But when police went to this address, they found out that Randy Riley had actually been evicted from this apartment. After all of these sightings and witness testimonies, police put together a timeline which showed that Deanne had walked out of the grocery store after buying all those strange things. She walked over for a little bit to the storage facility, met Riley with the people that he was with, and then they walked into the storage facility. They were later seen leaving the storage facility on surveillance footage around 1:30 p.m. The landlord at Riley's listed address said that she saw Riley with Deanne and one other person around 2:30 that same day. The landlord said that Deanne was just laying in the road at the time, just completely out of it. Another witness actually confirmed the sighting, saying that they also saw Deanne laying in the road and actually went up to her to see if she was okay. And again, Deanne said that she was just having a rough time because she was going through a divorce. The witness did say that Deanne did seem intoxicated, but thought that it wasn't anything too crazy given that she just said that she was having a rough time and going through a divorce, so this witness just left. Now, initially, police couldn't find Randy Riley because he had been evicted from that address and they didn't really know where to look. But eventually, police ended up tracking Randy Riley down through his mother, who told police where to find him. Police questioned Randy, and he told police that he and his friend James had met Deanne near the storage unit, and they were all drinking together and hanging out when Deanne just gave him her credit cards and told him to go get himself something to eat, and then he claimed to know nothing else about where Deanne was. The whole story of them hanging out and drinking together for a little bit did seem pretty reasonable, but police did not believe the story that Deanne just gave him her credit cards to just go and use freely. Police then arrested Randy for second-degree identity theft and brought him in for questioning. Now, this time when Randy was asked about how he knew Deanne, he kind of had a little bit of a different story. He said that him and his friend James were moving out after being evicted from his apartment and were at the storage facility when they saw Deanne acting drunk and belligerent, but he and James still hung out with her for a couple of hours. He said that they were walking down South Inland Empire Way when Deanne said that she had to go to the bathroom. So as they were walking, Deanne went up a hill and found some bushes to go into so she could use the bathroom. Randy said that his friend James went up into the bushes to check on Deanne and that she came out after going to the bathroom and then they just went their separate ways. He said that the last time he saw her was on the side of this road. He said that he went back to the place where he last saw her the next day, but he didn't see her this time. But they did see her shoes and her coat. So they decided to grab these clothes, and then that's when they found her credit cards inside of her coat pockets. I do want to mention as a little bit of a side note that this was the middle of November in Washington where it was pretty cold outside, so we don't really know why she would choose to take off her shoes and jacket in the middle of these cold temperatures. So already at this point, it kind of seems like his story just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, in the days previous to when they first questioned Randy, police had actually found Deanne's license in downtown Spokane in front of a Sonnenberg's deli and were hopeful that she may still have just been wandering, and that's why it was there. However, Randy actually admitted to police that he had thrown Deanne's license there to make it look like Deanne was still wandering around. He also said that he got rid of her jacket and shoes, but that he didn't know where Deanne was and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Randy was ultimately charged and sentenced to 13 months in jail for identity theft. Now, police did decide to go ahead and question James, who was the friend that Randy said that him and Deanne were with on November 4th. Now, when police questioned James, James had a little bit of a different story than Randy. James said that he didn't know anything about Randy taking Deanne's credit cards or clothes. He said that when they were all walking together, Deanne did go up the hill into the bushes to use the bathroom, but that Randy was actually the one that went up to check on her. He said that Randy was in the bushes for about 10 minutes, but then came out of the bushes by himself without Deanne. He said that Randy said that Deanne just wanted to stay where she was in the bushes, so they just decided to leave her behind. James said that he had not seen Deanne after she went into these bushes. After comparing the story of Randy and James, they were able to kind of figure out that the location that they were talking about was only about 300 yards away from Deanne's home. Because of this, police launched a search around the area. They used sniffer dogs, helicopters, and they searched on foot. However, there was absolutely no sign of Deanne or anything related to her at all. Because they couldn't really find anything to connect Randy or James to Deanne's disappearance, investigators decided to look into Mike Tibbetts, who was Deanne's fiance. Now, according to Mike, their relationship was perfect and everything was going great. However, Others said that their relationship may have not been as amazing as Mike said that it was. Deanne's best friend Amanda and Deanne's son's girlfriend Melanie said that they had witnessed some fights and arguments between Deanne and Mike in the weeks before. Amanda did show investigators text messages to her from Diane saying, "I'm out, I'm like 99% sure that he drugged me the other night," and said that she went to the doctor to get tested for drugs, but the doctor didn't find anything and did not believe her. Amanda said that Deanne had wanted to leave Mike for quite a while, and investigators also kind of took note of some of Mike's suspicious behaviors. We know that the night that Deanne went missing, he chose to just kind of stay by his car all night rather than calling police. When he found out that her credit card was being used at the store, he chose to just kind of wait by her car instead of going out to the store immediately to see her. He chose not to notify Deanne's family when she immediately went missing, and he didn't call the police right away either. Also, when he got Deanne's keys and gained access to her car, he chose to drive it home and look through the car rather than handing the car over to investigators to search it first. He also had refused to hand over Deanne's cell phone and the note that she left the night that she went missing. He said that the reasoning for this was basically because these items were important to him, and he was afraid that if he gave them to police that he would never get them back. As for Deanne claiming that she had been drugged, Mike said that Deanne had told Mike she believed the neighbors were tainting their water supply with poison and that an ex-boyfriend was trying to kill her, and she even accused Mike of conspiring to kill her along with them. These paranoid behaviors led Mike to believe that she was about to have another episode, and if you remember from before, this was around the same time that Deanne had stopped taking her meds because her new insurance would not cover them. At the time of her disappearance, Mike said that she had actually been off of her meds for about a month and a half. Now, some of Mike's decisions and behaviors had been questionable, but a lot of this was starting to make sense. Now, we don't really know for sure if she really had been drugged or if their relationship was as good as Deanne and Mike said, or if it was as bad as others believed it may have been. But it does make sense that if she was off her meds, that she was going into another manic episode and was growing paranoid of those around her. Because of this and the fact that investigators didn't really have much else on Mike, they really had no reason to suspect him of any wrongdoing. Now, a few months later, Amanda, Deanne's best friend, had received a Facebook message from James, who was one of the very last people to have seen Deanne alive. In this message, he seemed extremely frantic and said that he needed to speak with Deanne's family immediately, and he would say anything that they needed to know. Carson, Deanne's brother, arranged to speak with James, but when they actually did speak, James basically told Carson the same things that he had said before to police. He was being extremely vague and giving no new information. Carson believes that James was basically just in this state of panic and wanted to admit to something, but then quickly changed his mind. This was incredibly frustrating, but there really was not anything that they could do. So on February 27th, Deanne's 36th birthday, Amanda organized a new search comprised of old friends, people from their high school, and other volunteers to search around the area that Deanne was last known to be seen with Randy and James.
Searching for her when they wish they could be celebrating her. Today was Deanne's 36th birthday. Now the search party separated into 8 different groups to go over 8 different locations where Deanne is last believed to be seen.
There's a lot of people that are showing up, and definitely more eyes are better than one. Makes me feel better that knowing that that many more people care about her.
Is there any new information at all?
Not that I know of. There's, no, she's just kind of disappeared.
Today, volunteers retraced her last steps, hoping to find something.
Searching and trying to know what's happened and, where she's at, more than anything. Yeah, I just want her to call somebody and let them know she's okay. It would bring a lot of relief to a lot of people.
But again, absolutely nothing was found. At this point, the case just kind of stops. There has been absolutely no movement in this case, and there have been absolutely no more sightings of Deanne, no evidence found, no new suspects, no new leads, and most importantly, no new developments. To this day, we have absolutely no idea what could have happened to Deanne Hastings. So that's pretty much all we know for this case, so let's just go ahead and get into the theories. The first theory is that Deanne just decided to walk off on her own in the midst of her manic episode. People believe that she was in this mental state and then, after going into the bushes, that she may have just wandered off, gotten really far from where she was, and maybe she's just been in such a confused state that she, to this day, still has no idea that she is a missing person. Again, we know that Deanne did have a history of going off the grid during her manic episodes. We know that she may have been unhappy in her relationship and maybe even thought that those around her were trying to kill her. People believe that because of this paranoia, she may have just walked off and chose to leave everything behind. It's possible that after walking off that she just went somewhere and has never returned. Many of the signs kind of point to her walking off and leaving on her own. We know that she had just gone off of her medication, which seemed to be really the only thing that was helping her. And in the weeks leading up, she started getting paranoid of everyone around her. When someone's on medication for any sort of mental illness and then they just suddenly stop taking these medications, symptoms can be even worse as the body is withdrawing from these drugs. We do know that before this, she would let everyone know that she was about to have an episode and she was about to go off the grid and would check in with everyone after she did go off the grid. But with her symptoms being possibly far worse than they were before, maybe this time she just didn't. Maybe her psychosis was getting so bad to the point where she just didn't think to check in, or maybe even worse, she didn't check in because she thought those around her wanted to kill her or harm her in some sort of way. This theory definitely makes sense when you look at the timeline as well. She was seen on surveillance looking paranoid and buying all of these random things, including alcohol, to self-medicate. There were multiple witnesses who said she was saying incoherent things like calling one of them mommy and laying in the middle of the road being argumentative. She was seen wandering around so many different places, so it's not unlikely that she could have just wandered off so far, somewhere that nobody has thought to look. Maybe she had wandered off somewhere to where she has no idea where she is and is just part of the homeless community somewhere. She could easily be overlooked if she was homeless, so it makes sense why there had been no recent sightings of her. Now, the thing that points me away from her just walking off forever is the fact that after the Randy sighting, no one saw her again. If she was going to wander off so far, I definitely think that at least someone would have spotted her before she got too far. She was going up to people and talking to them, so I think it's extremely unlikely that after this incident, she just didn't talk to anyone else. If she, hitched a ride somewhere and they drove her out really far, I don't understand why this person wouldn't come forward unless they did something to her. Also, these episodes always came to an end at some point. Yes, they could have been even longer after she stopped taking her meds. Maybe they were more severe too, but I don't think that here, 4 years later, that she would still be in this mental state. I think that she would have gotten out of this mental state at some point and contacted someone. I don't think that she would choose to just cut off all contact with her children forever. It's possible that she stayed in this state, but I don't think that it's very likely. I also want to point out that she left her cell phone, her purse, basically everything behind. I don't think that she would have gotten very far without anyone seeing her and without any sort of resources. And again, I don't think that she would be in this permanent state of psychosis where she just never decided to contact her children ever again. The next theory is basically the same, that, she was suffering from a paranoid manic episode and wandered off, but that she passed away because of the elements or something else and had just never been found. If we believe Randy that they just left Deanne on the side of the road, that means that she could have just wandered off in the other direction and gotten completely lost, didn't realize that she was so close to her home, never found her way back, and just succumbed to the elements. It was an extremely cold day in Washington, and we know that her jacket and her shoes were both found where they had supposedly left her. If she was just walking around with no shoes, no coat, just wandering around in these cold temperatures, maybe she could have gotten hypothermia or succumbed to the elements that way. Maybe she just wandered off into the wilderness and an animal got her. Maybe she had just never been found. Now, I do think that this theory is possible, I guess, but I definitely do not think this is the most likely. Just like in the last theory, I don't think that she would have gotten very far without a single other person seeing her. Again, there were so many witnesses that saw her before this, so, maybe someone isn't coming forward, but again, I don't know why someone wouldn't come forward if they didn't do anything to her. Plus, there have been so many search efforts for her, and it doesn't seem likely that she would have gotten very far. Now, we don't know the exacts of where they looked or how far they looked or, really what they did, I guess. But you'd think that if they assume that she could have walked off somewhere, that they would have searched in a large enough area to where they would have found her if she did walk off. I think that's probably one of the main theories in the police's heads, that, she walked off, so it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't look, in a big enough radius to where, she could have walked off to. And again, I do think that if she just walked off somewhere and was deceased somewhere, I do think that someone would have found her by now. So the next main theory is that in the midst of her psychotic episode, someone took advantage of Deanne and did something to her. Within this theory, there are a few people that we can look into. So the first theory is that the employee at the trading company, a grocery store, did something to Deanne. We know that he met Deanne outside of the knitting factory. He took her over to his place. They drank and smoked, and he dropped her off the next day to never see her again. And when Mike brought the flyer to him when she was missing, he acted like, he may recognize her, but he wasn't really completely sure, only to later realize, have an epiphany, that he did know her. Then after Mike came and searched his apartment, he just left and went to Florida. That was extremely odd. Now, this man did say that he just could no longer afford to live in Spokane and had to move back with his family in Florida, which does make sense, but the timing could not be any more suspicious. However, we do know that there have been multiple people who had seen Deanne long after he last claimed to see her. We know that if Deanne was in this psychotic episode, that, if he drove up to the grocery store, left her in his car while he went out to go get cigarettes, that she very well could have just gotten out of the car and walked off. His story does make sense that he met her outside of the knitting factory, because we know that her car was parked nearby. We know that she left her purse and her phone in her car, but she did take her ID and her credit cards with her. We know that he was honest about where he took her the next morning, because multiple people saw her at the grocery store the next morning. In my opinion, it makes sense that he would be nervous to come forward about spending the night with her right away. He was probably nervous that people would look at him as a suspect, since he had been under the influence and spent the night with this girl who just went missing right after he saw her. If he truly had nothing to do with this, I completely understand why he would be scared to come forward. And again, multiple people saw her after the fact, so unless he came back later and did something to her, I just don't think it's very likely. So the next theory is that Mike Tibbetts, Deanne's fiance, was involved in her disappearance. So we know that Mike did have some questionable actions in the hours and days after Deanne's disappearance. First, we know that when he couldn't find her, he did not call police right away. Then when he was able to track her car down, he didn't really do anything except stand there and wait. Then when he saw that her credit card was being used, he didn't go to the grocery store, and he just kind of hoped that she would have come back. He didn't report her to police as missing for 36 hours. Plus, we know that, she left a note that Mike won't hand over, and he won't hand over her phone. We know that instead of turning her car over to police to be searched, he chose to just drive it home himself, ruining any valuable evidence that possibly could have been found. And lastly, we know that some people close to Deanne said that their relationship really wasn't as good as they played it out to be. However, again, we know that Deanne did have a history of going off the grid. It's very possible that in the beginning, Mike just thought that that's what this was. He may have thought that he shouldn't go chase after her at the grocery store because, she may be gone by the time he gets there, and then maybe, if she was going to go to her car, that by the time she got to her car, that, they would have missed her then. Maybe, like he said, he just assumed that she would come back to her car, and he didn't want there to be any sort of possibility of him missing her. I do think that that's very possible. Also, Mike said that the note and Deanne's phone are the last things that he has of her, and he doesn't want the possibility of police not giving it back to him if he does give it to them. He said that there's valuable photos on the phone, and that, of course, the note is written in her handwriting. It makes sense that he would want to hold on to those things, especially since the phone had just been sitting in the car, so there's not really much valuable information that the police can get from it anyways. And, we do know that driving the car can destroy valuable evidence, but maybe Mike didn't. It's very possible that he didn't even think about what he was doing, and he just wanted to get her car back home. I don't think that he drove the car with intent of destroying evidence. If I put myself into his shoes and I didn't know much about evidence and investigations, I probably would have driven the car home too and not even given it a second thought. We don't know what was going through Mike's head at the time, so we can't really judge what he was doing. As for not reporting her for 36 hours, I do think that that's pretty suspicious, and I don't understand why he wouldn't report her right away. But again, she did have these episodes, and maybe he didn't want to cause a big panic and, create chaos if she was just going to return to her car like he thought she would. Now, personally, I think that if I knew someone that had a history of doing this, I would still report them missing, especially if they normally checked in and then, didn't check in this time. But I've never been in this situation. Most of us have never been in this situation, so we don't know what we would have done for sure. Maybe she had a history of these episodes in their relationship where she didn't check in. Maybe, this was a pattern of behaviors that he was used to, and he did what he always did. Maybe he didn't want to report it to police right away because he didn't want to be the boy that cried wolf. He didn't want to keep making these reports every time that she went off the grid if they would always result in her just coming back. And then, lo and behold, something happens to her later. He made all these reports before. Now no one wants to, search for her because she always comes back. In my head, that makes a lot of sense for why he wouldn't want to report her missing to police right away. And as for Deanne saying that Mike drugged her, it's very possible that their relationship was not as good as they said it was behind closed doors. But we also know that she was acting extremely paranoid and was getting suspicious of everyone around her. And the doctor even confirmed that she did not have those drugs in her system, especially with the entire timeline of witnesses seeing her and surveillance footage. I just do not think this theory is very likely. The last theory is that, of course, Randy Riley and his friend James did something to Deanne. I definitely think that this is the most likely theory. For one, we know that they were the very last people to have known to be seen with Deanne alive. We know that Randy had stolen her credit cards. He used them. He threw her license to throw police off and took her jacket and shoes. He also lied and changed his story of what he was doing with Deanne multiple times, and James' story didn't even match up with any of the stories he was giving. Lastly, we know that in a panic, James messaged Amanda and said that he had information, but when he actually spoke to Deanne's brother, he changed his mind and didn't give up any new information. To me, that's very telling behavior of someone who was feeling extreme guilt but just doesn't know exactly how to handle the situation. Maybe he was feeling this guilt and changed his mind because he didn't want to get in trouble, or maybe he told Randy that he was going to tell everyone and Randy threatened or silenced him. People in this theory believe that they either took advantage of her to rob her and use her credit card, or they actually did something to her and her body has just never been found. I personally think that both possibilities can be very likely. Again, we know that he was using her credit card and through her license to throw police off. It's very possible that they noticed this girl in a very distorted state and just saw her as someone that they could take advantage of and rob. Maybe when they were in the bushes, Randy took this chance to rob her and he left her there. Maybe when he went to the bushes to try and rob her, she fought back and he harmed her in that way. Or maybe he did something even worse to her in those bushes. Maybe he saw her in this distorted state and wanted to take advantage of her in some other way. Maybe when she was in these bushes, he saw it as a chance to make sexual advances towards her. James said that, they were in these bushes for 10 minutes. Maybe Randy made sexual advances towards Deanne. She resisted and he harmed her. We know that Randy returned to the scene the next day and just happened to find the jacket and shoes. He said that the reason he was in this area was because he was moving out of his apartment and he was going to the storage unit. But who just sees a jacket and shoes laying there and just decides to take them, especially if you know that they belong to someone that you were just hanging out with the day before. Maybe the real reason he went back to this location was because he had harmed her and left her there the day before. He knew he had to do something to conceal the evidence, so that's when he did that. Maybe James knew about all of this and just feels so guilty that he wanted to say something but just feels like he can't. Or maybe James helped Randy conceal this whole thing and he knows that if he talks, he will go to jail. Again, I think the behavior of James is very telling of someone who feels guilty. But there is one thing that kind of points away from this theory, which is that, police did use the sniffer dogs to search the area. And, this is the area that James and Randy were known to have been with Deanne. However, these sniffer dogs did not alert to anything in the area. However, we don't really know if police are absolutely positive that this is the exact area where they were, or if it's just something that they kind of gathered from the information they had. We don't really know if Randy and James pointed them to this specific location, or if they just think that this is the location. If it's not the correct location altogether, it's possible that's why the sniffer dogs didn't alert there. Or maybe Randy was lying about the whole situation altogether and they were never in the bushes to begin with. Maybe that's what James was going to tell Carson. Maybe James wanted to tell Carson the real location. In my opinion, this is definitely the most likely theory. Again, we know that they were the last people to have seen her alive, and there's absolutely nothing we know more about this after that. In my opinion, I think Deanne was suffering from a manic paranoid episode because of her bipolar disorder, and someone took advantage of her. I personally think that Randy knows a lot more than what he is saying, and I think that if he would just come forward and tell the whole truth, I think we would know a lot more about what really happened. I think the night that she went missing, she maybe went to the knitting factory to blow off some steam and let loose for the night. We know that she was just starting a new chapter in her life by going to cosmetology school, and while exciting, this can be extremely stressful. From someone who suffers from bipolar disorder and is going through a huge life transformation while, recently being off of her medication, that can be a mixture leading to a severe manic episode. So again, maybe she was going to the knitting factory to let loose. Maybe she spent the night with the man, and after smoking and drinking, the mix of drugs just made things a lot worse. We know that she wasn't in the right state of mind when she went to the store. She bought vodka, She was seen by multiple witnesses who said that she was clearly intoxicated and acting erratically. I think in the midst of all of this craziness, she was taken advantage of. Even with all of these stressful things in her life, I think she was excited and ready to move forward. I don't think she would choose to go off the grid forever like this. And, after working so hard for so many years to fight for her children and her life, It just does not seem very likely to me. This case is extremely frustrating and was very preventable. I think it's so unfortunate that this police officer on the scene did absolutely nothing. The officer said that she just seemed to be intoxicated, and because there's no public intoxication laws, she just couldn't do anything. However, Deanne was sitting there being defiant and uncooperative with paramedics. She was saying all this about, being drugged and kidnapped, and she was saying all these crazy things to the witnesses. She very clearly was not in the right state of mind, yet this officer just let her go. I personally kind of think that this looks like lazy police work. Maybe she didn't want to deal with this drunk and belligerent woman, so she just left the scene and thought, nothing more of it. If this police officer, I think, would have just done her job, this entire thing could have been avoided. If Randy and James would just come out with everything that they know, we might know exactly what happened to Deanne. There are so many things that could have been done to help Deanne. If her insurance company would have just listened to her doctor instead of just seeing her, as another number, another dollar sign. They could have just provided her with the medication that she so desperately needed. This may have never happened if the police officer on scene just did her job and helped a woman who was so obviously not in the right state of mind. This may never have happened. And again, if Randy and James would just come forward with everything they know, I think that we would have known what happened to Deanne a very long time ago. This is probably one of the most frustrating cases I have looked into because Deanne was just trying to do well in her life. She was trying to succeed not only for herself, but for her children. I genuinely hope that she's out there somewhere and that she's just waiting to be found. Deanne is 5'4" and 130 pounds. She had blondish brown hair and has brown eyes. She went missing in the Spokane, Washington area. If you have any information about Deanne's case, please contact the Spokane Police Department at 509-456-2233. So what do you guys think happened? Do you think Mike had something to do with this, given his questionable behaviors? Do you think that Randy had something to do with this? Or do you think that she just wandered somewhere off on her own and either died of exposure or is homeless somewhere? Please let me know what you guys think in the comments below.